Tonight's video features 3 stories you were never meant to hear. These aren't ghost tales or urban legends. These are real encounters from real people who lived through something they can't explain. Settle in, because once these stories start, you'll feel like you're right there with them. Story 1. The power died at exactly 1:17 a.m. It wasn't a flicker or a brownout. The entire world outside the windows was swallowed by an absolute suffocating darkness. I stood motionless in the center of the living room, my breath catching in my throat. I live deep in the hollow, miles from the nearest neighbor. When the grid goes out here, you are truly alone. The immediate silence was the worst part. The low hum of the refrigerator, the distant whine of the town's electricity, all gone. Now there was only the sound of my own blood pumping too fast, and the aggressive drumming of rain on the roof. I fumbled for my phone, its narrow beam a pathetic, sickly green against the oppressive black. I found a stub of a candle and lit it, placing it on the kitchen counter. The tiny flame cast long, shifting shadows that made the familiar cabinets look like gaunt, hungry figures. Then the noises started. At first I told myself it was the house settling, or the wind worrying the eaves. But these sounds were too rhythmic, too deliberate. A soft, wet thud. Thud. Coming from somewhere near the foundation, like a heavy sack being carefully dragged through mud. I pressed myself against the counter, candlelight flickering madly, straining my ears. The sound stopped. For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Then, a scraping noise against the sliding glass door leading to the deck. It was high, brittle, like fingernails on the aluminum frame. I crept low, phone light off, using only the weak candle glow for guidance. I didn't dare look through the glass, but the light betrayed me. As the candle flickered, blown by a draft I couldn't locate, a shadow moved across the inner pane. It was immense, blocking the faint ambient glow of the moon trying to penetrate the storm clouds. The silhouette was tall and thin, but what terrified me was the head. Not rounded, but sharply triangular, like a piece of broken slate. It paused directly in front of the door, completely motionless. I retreated silently, backing into the pantry closet beside the main hall. I pulled the wooden door almost shut, leaving only a sliver of space to breathe. The dragging noise started again, but this time it wasn't outside. It was closer. It was inside the house. The sound was coming from the living room, a heavy sliding shuffle moving across the hardwood floor. It reached the entryway, and I held my breath, tasting dust. I could hear the faint, low sound of breathing. Not human breathing, but a slow, raspy inhalation, deep and wet, followed by a barely audible click. Then, the footfalls stopped directly outside the pantry. The last sound I heard before the candle on the counter finally sputtered out and plunged the entire world back into irreversible darkness was the soft, deliberate scrape of a metal latch being moved, followed by the slow, gentle sigh of the pantry door being nudged inward. Story 2. The power didn't just flicker. It died with a violent, final pop that smelled faintly of burnt wire. 1 second I was reading, the next I was drowning in an absolute void, the only sound the furious drumming of the late October rain against the glass. I was utterly alone in this isolated old house. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down the unpaved road. The darkness was suffocating, thick enough to lean on. I fumbled for my phone, its weak blue light barely cutting through the gloom of the living room. The wind howled a high, desperate note, but beneath it, a new sound began. It was not thunder or wind. It was a rhythmic thump. Thump, like a heavy, sodden sack being dragged across the porch stones. Slow, persistent. I froze, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. This house always groaned in a storm, but this sound was deliberate, originating from outside the front entrance, just beyond the heavy oak door. I told myself it was a loose branch, a rogue piece of metal from the shed, but branches don't have that steady, measured rhythm. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. I crept to the kitchen, found a rusted flashlight under the sink, and clicked it on. The beam was yellow and weak. I moved to the hallway window, pulling back the curtain just an inch. The light was useless outside, swallowed instantly by the blackness. But the rain was letting up slightly. and through the momentary gap in the storm, I saw it. A shape. It stood motionless near the edge of the lawn, silhouetted against the slightly lighter gray of the sky. It was too tall to be a deer, too slender to be a man wearing heavy gear. It was elongated, almost spindly, and it was watching the house. Its stillness was the most terrifying thing. Patient, predatory. I dropped the curtain and stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The rhythmic thump had stopped. Everything was silent now, save for the residual drip of water from the gutters. The silence was worse than the noise. It meant it was closer, listening to me. I backed toward the staircase, the flashlight wavering. That's when I heard the latch click. It wasn't a crash. It was a soft, sickening snick, the sound of the deadbolt I had triple-checked being patiently, expertly overridden. It was opening the front door. I threw myself against the wall, trying to mute my ragged breathing. My phone buzzed once, the battery icon flashing critically low. The yellow beam of the flashlight flickered, stuttered, and died, plunging me into the absolute dark once more. Now, there was a new sound inside the house. A slow, heavy scrape on the hardwood floor of the entryway, followed by a slight, wet, sniffing sound, impossibly close. It wasn't human breathing. It was too deep, too measured, and it was right there, searching the air. It knew exactly where I was hiding. The silence returned, pressing in on me, heavy and alive. Then something cold and slick brushed against my ankle. Story 3. The first sign was the silence. Not just the quiet of my small cottage, but the absolute crushing absence of the hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, the almost imperceptible thrum of life from the grid. Then the darkness hit, a solid, tangible wall that swallowed the room whole. No flicker, no groan of dimming lights, just instant total void. I was in the kitchen, fumbling for a candle, the mundane act suddenly fraught with an unfamiliar tension. The storm outside had been brewing all day, but this was different. The wind howled now, a banshee wail that seemed to push against the very walls of the house, rattling the old window panes. My phone was dead, a forgotten relic on the charger. Isolation, sudden and complete, settled in like a shroud. Creak. I froze, hand hovering over the pantry shelf. It wasn't the house settling. It was too sharp, too distinct. A floorboard from the hallway, just outside the kitchen door. My breath hitched. I told myself it was the wind, flexing the old timbers, but the rationalization felt hollow in the absolute black. My heart began to thud, a frantic drum against my ribs. I found a half-burnt candle and a box of matches, the scratch and flare a tiny, fragile victory against the encroaching darkness. The flickering flame cast grotesque, dancing shadows that made the familiar kitchen corners alien and menacing. I hugged the candle close, its meager warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had seeped into my bones. Thump. This time, it was from upstairs. A heavy, single impact, like something dropping. And then, a dragging sound, faint but unmistakable, moving slowly across the floor directly above my bedroom. My mind raced, clawing for explanations. A branch hitting the roof, a squirrel in the attic. But the dragging, it sounded heavy, deliberate. I gripped the candle holder, the brass cold and slick in my sweaty palm. My gaze darted to the window, rain streaking the pane. For a fleeting instant, a silhouette passed. Not a tree branch, not the flickering of lightning. Too tall, too angular, too still. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belonged to nothing natural. My blood ran cold, fear a bitter taste in my mouth. The distinct click of the latch on the back door, followed by a slow, agonizing creak of wood on wood. I didn't hear glass breaking, no forced entry, just the quiet, eerie sound of the door opening. From inside the house. I stumbled backwards, upsetting a chair with a loud scrape that seemed to echo through the entire, suddenly porous house. The candle flickered wildly, threatening to die. I dove behind the kitchen island, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to become utterly invisible. Every nerve ending screamed. I crammed my fist into my mouth to stifle a whimper. Heavy, measured footsteps began to fall on the linoleum floor of the hallway. Each step was a hammer blow against my sanity, drawing closer, closer. They paused at the kitchen entrance. The shadows cast by my dying candle stretched, distorted, as if reaching out to embrace a new, chilling form. I could almost feel the presence, a cold density in the air. And then, a soft, wet sniff from the doorway. It wasn't human. Not quite. And it was waiting. For me.